When you hear of wars and revolutions, do not be frightened. These must happen first, but the end will not come right away. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in many parts of the world, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. A fatal epidemic disease is wiping out the nation and countless people around the world, and it is called HIV/AIDS. Is HIV/AIDS the disease that is spoken about in the book of Matthew? Is it one of the signs leading to the end of days as is described in the Bible? We went out to confront various medical science experts, traditional and religious leaders, and healers to understand this disease, and also to know their opinion about HIV/AIDS and its possible link to the end of days.
It is a disease that affects largely Africa, and more so because Africa is economically challenged.
It can infect anybody, just like any virus can.
Isifo se-HIV iqiniso eliphelele asisazi nathi thina zinyanga.
The church would say it comes from sin. I would say it comes from the devil.
I personally don't know where it comes.
This is the prediction of HIV and AIDS that Kremoto did in 1979.
I think maybe it's always a good place to start with basic terminology. What does HIV stand for? HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus. So when we talk HIV, we talk about a virus, the name of the virus that is responsible for affecting one's immune system.
We now know that it is the cause of AIDS, which is advanced immunodeficiency syndrome. It's not a disease itself, AIDS, it's a condition of the body where HIV is very advanced. So where the body's immune system, which is supposed to protect us from infection and disease, basically fails, and a person becomes very susceptible to conditions and diseases which we would call opportunistic infections. So those are conditions which a person would not normally acquire unless they had a very weak immune system.
But because your immune system is depleted, weakened, these illnesses can then take over. And even simple illnesses such as gastroenteritis, respiratory diseases, you can get certain tumors, certain pneumonias, meningitis, and those are the types of illnesses that are usually responsible for death in a particular patient who has been living with HIV.
The majority of people, I prefer for us to think of it as HIV, because HIV is a chronic infection. We can manage it, people can live a life, they don't need to get AIDS.
HIV primarily is a sexually transmitted illness, especially in South Africa. If you look at 100 people who have HIV, probably about 90% would have gotten them through sexual transmission.
The origins of HIV/AIDS has eluded medical doctors and scientists ever since the disease came to the attention of the world in the early 80s. For almost 3 decades, the origins of HIV/AIDS have been debated globally, from the virus being manufactured in a lab to a promiscuous flight attendant and many other theories. But the question remains, just where does AIDS come from?
I wish I knew where AIDS came from.
I'm not sure if I'm best placed to respond to that question.
I don't know, but the seer said that it started with the homosexuals.
all sickness originate from darkness, from the devil's side. And that's why Jesus Christ came, to set us free from sin and set us free from death. Romans chapter 8 tells us, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life, which is in Christ Jesus, has set us free from the law of sin and death. So sin is the original cause of all sickness, I believe.
From what we read and hear from the experts, it started many years ago. Some say it came from an ape or a gorilla from somewhere in Africa.
First of all, it was looked on as a gay disease because it was mainly among the homosexual population that it was being identified. But I think years before that, there were whole populations in kind of Central Africa where people would have all these symptoms of being very sick, losing weight like anything. And in fact, they used to call it Slim's disease or Slimmer's disease.
It has brought so much havoc in our world, and people are looking for the remedy, Scientists are still asking the very same question. Where does HIV come from?
It's very confusing for us. The best people who can respond, who knows technically how it happened, everything, would be Western Health.
The disease was first discovered in America, in the San Francisco and New York at the same time in the early 80s. So it's a disease that was initially confined to gay men or men who sleep with men at that time. But it soon spread to affect people across the board.
HIV has been traced back a long way back, certainly as early as 1905, and possibly even further back in time. The more that we study it, the more we're realizing that HIV has actually been around for a very long time.
But I think scientists have got it more or less nailed down. Now, we know that HIV originated in West Africa. And if you can trace it way back, we've traced it to the chimpanzee. And in those days, we have identified the virus called simian immunodeficiency virus, which is closely related to HIV, so that's called SIV, and we have HIV. And in those days, they used to eat the meat. It was for human consumption. So hunters could have gotten it. As people ate uncooked meat, in the process of killing the animal, it could have been transmitted into, and that's how we believe that it entered the human race. That's called a zoonosis, and it's happened with bird flu, with swine flu, where disease has crossed over from animal species into human species.
When it is said that the disease came from the monkeys, Africans and monkeys have lived together for millions of years. And in Africa, a monkey is a holy being, because a monkey is seen as a symbol of intelligence. And that's why, for instance, when Africans want to depict intelligence, they draw a monkey. When they want to depict the mouthpiece of God, they depict a monkey. And that's how close Africans have been to the monkey.
When we heard about it, especially in South Africa, we thought maybe white people were lying and trying to kill us. So we didn't take it seriously until we started seeing people in our own families dying of their disease. Then we started realizing that, this thing is serious.
I think to say HIV comes from the monkey is just an attempt to shake off responsibility by those that are behind this thing.
Some believe that HIV is a conspiracy or a man-made virus manufactured as part of a biological warfare designed to wipe out Africans. Africa is the most affected continent in the world, with the highest infections and death rates recorded in sub-Saharan Africa. With an estimated 5.6 million HIV-positive people, South Africa continues to have the world's largest HIV epidemic.
The infection rate, at the moment, it's estimated that about 33 million people throughout the world are living with HIV and AIDS. About 2/3 of those, about 22 million, are from sub-Saharan Africa. HIV/AIDS has had a devastating effect on the African continent, and including South Africa as well. In fact, 8 of the countries which are found in Southern Africa, including South Africa, do have more than 10% of the adult population living with HIV and AIDS.
The majority of deaths, more than 80% of the deaths related to HIV, are also happening in sub-Saharan Africa.
Just stand by the antenatal clinic in El Barra so that you see for yourself. People are sleeping.
And South Africa certainly, unfortunately, ranks up in the top 5 as one of the countries with the highest prevalence of HIV, and it's an epidemic, there's no doubt.